Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Understanding Clinic to Lab Workflows. Many thanks for taking time out of your schedule this evening to join us, and we hope you'll enjoy the next hour and learn some interesting things about how your scans as a clinician, how that's all utilized on the lab end. So firstly, let me introduce myself. I'm Mark Barry, Managing Director of ESM Digital Solutions. We set up ESM in 2007, and since then have become one of the UK and Ireland's leading providers of 3Shape technology. And with me tonight, my colleague Simon. Would you like to introduce yourself there, Simon?
Hi everyone, and thanks for joining the webinar. My name is Simon Bennett-Williams. I work at ESM as a training support specialist, mainly with the 3Shape dental system, but also supporting other 3Shape softwares and technically supporting the ELOS products. My background is a dental technician, but for many years I've been working in the CAD camera arena with dental.
Great, thanks Simon. And then if we just take a quick look at ESM, we like to present ourselves as a truly open partner delivering truly open solutions. Our main product range is 3Shape products, which, as I said, we've been working with since 2007. And in more recent years, past 4 years or so, we took on the ELOS MedTech range of digital implant components, Formlabs 3D printers, and the DG Shape range of milling machines, both for clinic use and for laboratory use as well. In the webinar tonight, the objective is to give clinicians who are using intraoral scanners in daily practice an insight into how these scans are used by the lab and some of the challenges that can exist. We do find when we're doing training and we're doing demos that there's a certain disconnect between what happens in the digital side in the clinic and the digital side in the lab. So the primary aim of this webinar is to help dentists understand what happens on the lab side of things to get a greater understanding for that. So we'll talk about different file types and how we can transfer those scans. Let's look at some digital implant components. What do we need to know about that for implant workflows? We'll do a demonstration of an intraoral scan with an implant workflow, and Simon will take us through what happens on the lab side. We'll look at some of the lab communication through the 3Shape Communicate portal, and we'll look at some other additional tools as well within intraoral scanners that can be beneficial to the lab. And we have some tips from the labs as well. We put out a little survey online through a Facebook forum and just got some input from some of the lab technicians as to what they'd like to see covered in this topic as well. Really important to consider, whilst we're a 3Shape provider, we sell ELOS components as well. We'll be talking about an implant workflow, but everything we're doing this evening is not specific to 3Shape. It's not specific to ELOS. So whatever intraoral scanner system you're using, whatever lab you're working with, once they've got a CAD CAM system, all the principles apply. So this is very much a transferable workflow that we'll be discussing. So firstly, let's take a look at file types. STL files is a very common 3D file format that a lot of people are very familiar with and would be aware of. It's effectively a 3D version of a JPEG or a PDF or something like that. So it's a file format that's very, very popular in the world of 3D imaging. PLY, OBJ, they're two other file formats as well that would be quite popular. They're very open. And what we mean by open is that they're very transferable from one system to another, from one piece of software to another. The result of that, though, is sometimes there's a limitation in terms of what content can be within that file. Then we look at some proprietary file formats. So just the one we'd be most familiar with would be 3Shape DCM or 30XZ file formats. And yes, they're a proprietary file format. They're specific to 3Shape systems, but the result of that is that it can hold more data. So yes, it will contain 3D information like an STL or a PLY file will, but it can also hold additional information such as shade information or margin line information, or if we use patient-specific motion feature, that kind of jaw motion can be contained within that file format as well. One thing that's really important to bear in mind is that whilst there's always a lot of talk about STL files being the key thing that we should watch out for with a system, not all STL files are equal. In the same way, JPEG files representing a photograph, you can have a high resolution and a low resolution. You could take a JPEG photograph with a Nokia phone or with an iPhone 12 or 13 or 15, whatever is latest. You're going to get some difference in the quality of the image, of course. And it's the same with intraoral scanners as well. Just because it generates an STL file does not necessarily mean that they're all of a suitable quality. So you can see here some examples of files with holes in it or artifacts. And here's a file with tiny little artifacts narrowly naked to the eye, but they're the kind of thing that can pose a real challenge to software. So always give that some consideration when looking at an intraoral scanner. Now let's consider how we transfer files from the clinic through to the lab. There's lots of common and popular solutions such as WhatsApp, email, Dropbox. They're all ways in which we'll transfer photographs or email or information, maybe not patient notes as such, but definitely STL files and scans. Lots of different open formats there for transferring. So they're simple and convenient. We have access to all those tools on a regular basis. They're not special software. There's very rarely any cost associated with using them. However, in terms of security, GDPR compliance, there's a big question mark over that. There's a risk of error. There's a risk of miscommunication as well. If you're taking a file and you're sending it through to a lab along with a separate email, perhaps with notes about the case, maybe a separate email or WhatsApp messages, there's a risk that the information will get lost and maybe not translated through. The result being the work that comes back is maybe not what you expected it to be. Then we look at some system-specific platforms. So 3Shape has Communicate, Align has MyItero, Sirona has the Sirona Connect platform, and there's lots of other systems out there as well. And they're online cloud-based platforms that these manufacturers have put in place to help users of their clinic solutions communicate with users of their lab solutions. Simple and convenient? Absolutely. It's very seamless, one click, hit send, and everything that happens during the scan goes through to the lab. Are there any special software requirements or costs? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends on the system. It depends on what you're doing. It depends on if you have any other software. There may or may not be some costs. GDPR compliant, generally speaking, absolutely. Is it secure? Generally speaking, absolutely. Is there a risk of error and is there a risk of miscommunication? If it's a 3Shape user, 3Shape clinic working with a 3Shape lab via 3Shape Communicate, well then the risk of error or miscommunication is really, really minimal. If it was a 3Shape Trios user in a clinic working through Communicate, but working with a lab, perhaps it's using another piece of software, there will be some manual intervention there at some point, and the result of that will be that there'll be a greater risk of error and a greater risk of miscommunication. So let's take a look at an implant scanning workflow. So before you start, if you're new to intraoral scanning, or maybe you've got experience and you're now new to implant workflows, before you start, the very first thing you need to do is speak to your lab. It's very often dentists speak to their implant reps, which is a natural first point of contact. Get some components, do a scan, send it through to the lab, and then the lab comes back and says, I can't deliver that restoration request that you have. So the first thing you should do is speak to the lab. The lab would most likely be working with these implant systems on a routine basis, so they'll be able to advise you. They'll have experience, they'll fully understand the workflow, and they'll have all of the tools necessary to help deliver to you the restoration of your requirement. Some of the key components involved in digital implant workflows is the scan body. That's the key, that's the first step. And after that, we've got, generically speaking, we call them tie bases, or for ELOS, we call them hybrid bases. And these will be components that we use for screw retained crown solutions. We also need a printed model analog solution. And believe it or not, there are some systems out there that has a scan body, but doesn't have a printed model analog solution. So the problem there is you could do a scan, the lab can design a crown, make the crown, but you don't have a model to verify that crown on, or indeed finish it if it was a porcelain build, if a porcelain buildup was required, for example. So get to know your components. And another key component is the CAD library. So really at the front end, you got your scan body. That must be good. It must be accurate, because it is ultimately responsible for the accuracy of the restoration. And so the scan body must deliver accuracy. The libraries must deliver restorative choice. Now, what I mean by that is that the library is something that will go into the CAD software. It's information that will go into the CAD software, and it will help the CAD technician, it will help the CAD software understand everything it needs to know from the scan body information. And again, this will all make sense when Simon goes through a demonstration, but it's what opens up opportunities. So again, if, for example, you had a scan body and the library came from the manufacturer, it could be very limited and very restrictive, and in an extreme case could mean that you can only follow a very certain workflow with that when using that particular scan body. Something like ELOS, as we said, our business kind of mantra is we deliver open solutions in an open manner. So with using an ELOS component, you as the dentist can use your ELOS scan body, do your scan, send it through to your lab, and your restorative options are wide open, generally speaking, because we have all the components, and a lot of third-party manufacturing solutions tend to like the ELOS components well because they can trust them for accuracy. So with that, let's take a look at some demonstrations. I'm going to do a demonstration of the scanning workflow with Trios. I have a typodont with a scan body, so I'll work through that. And we'll do a quick demonstration of the 3Shape Communicate platform to illustrate how the scan is available via the cloud. And then Simon will then take over on his side and walk through the dental system side of things. Enjoy the videos. Once we've entered the patient's information and we set up a new case, in this case working with the Trios software, we're brought to this prescription page. And the purpose of this prescription page is twofold. One is to communicate to the lab exactly what we're doing, and secondly is to communicate to the software exactly what we're doing so that the software can generate workflows to help us get through the particular process. So working through the screen on the top left hand side, we have a default location here for Simon. Simon's going to be our lab for today, but if I click on that, I could change that to any of the other labs that I'm connected with. You can see there's plenty of labs there for me to choose from. Obviously, your own selection there might be a little bit narrower. Then we select the tooth we're working with. So on the typodont we're working with tonight, we have a upper right 6, and we've got an implant in position there. So we click on a tooth. I select that it's an abutment, so it's going to be a screw retained crown in this case. We select the manufacturer. The implant, the implant replica that's in the typodont is Nobel. It's a replace, and the connection is a regular platform. I want to have a monolithic zirconia sitting on top of that tie base, and we'll go for shade 8.3. And again, just a reminder there that it's going to the Simon's lab, SPW lab. So we've defined everything that we're going to do on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, we'll select some other information. So the delivery date, that's a mandatory field. We need to specify when we want that back. We'll hit set there. The software also suggests an emergence profile scan. So when we're scanning for implant cases, it's a 2-stage scan. We scan the emergence or the anatomy, and then we scan with a scan flag in place. So by virtue of the fact that we selected an abutment on the left-hand side here, the software has automatically selected an additional scan. Some of the other options we have are pre-preparation scans. So if we had a tooth form in place, whether that's an original crown before extraction, maybe it's a provisional crown, maybe it's a partial denture, whatever tooth form we have in there, we can capture that as well if we so choose to do so. So we'll move on to the next step, which is the scan page, and we'll work through the normal scanning protocol. So we'll scan the lower arch first. And as always, it's really important to capture a good foundation scan. So with Trios, the standard scan protocol, scan the occlusal surface, scan lingual on the lower, and then we roll around and scan buccal. And all of the time we're watching the lower right hand image to make sure the scanner is staying on track on teeth, and watching the main image to make sure the software is filling in all the detail we need to have filled in. And using the hands-free functionality, we can inspect the scan. You can see there's a couple of missing spots there, just maybe distal on the 7. Let's go and capture that. And of course, that's your clinical decision if it's something you need to do. In this case, it's an antagonist. It's at the other side of the arch. It's not a big deal. So we're ready to scan the upper arch. We're going to scan the upper arch. This first scan is called the emergence profile scan. So we've removed the healing abutment. Again, scan the occlusal surface. This time we'll roll over buccal. And then we'll do the palatal surface in full. Roll around, capture some missing details there. And back to the implant position. Make sure we capture the proximal surface. The definition of this scan, within the Trios software anyway, it's called the emergence profile scan. I like to use the word anatomy scan because this is the anatomy. This is the scan that the lab is ultimately going to design the crown and the crown and the abutment upon. So we have all of the anatomical information here. We're just missing the implant information, and that's carried out in the next step. So I need to tell the software that's the tooth we're working with. Software presents a nice blue circle, and we move on to the next stage. And the next stage is where we're going to capture more detailed implant information. So we place our scan flag. Put the scan flag in place on the typodont. Screw it in, gentle finger tight. And it is recommended that you would take a little quick x-ray to make sure that that has seated properly. And then picking up on an adjacent tooth, we push back and scan as much as we can at the scan flag. All of the time trying to keep that scan flag in view. And there we go. We have everything we need. So what's really important to bear in mind now, we have two scans for the upper arch as shown up here. The upper arch, the first step, which was the emergence profile or the anatomy, and the second step, which is the scan flag. It's really important that we have all of the anatomical detail in the upper scan, and we have the scan flag information in the second scan. And the software then in the lab, and you'll see that in a moment now, it's when Simon presents his side of things, you will see that the lab software will use the scan flag information to interpolate where the implant information and drop it into the initial scan. So that initial scan will become a hybrid scan. It will contain all of the anatomical detail that was captured during the scan, and it will contain the implant information through a superimposition process whereby the scan flag is used as a reference. And then the next step, of course, is to capture the bite. So we'll remove the scan flag. We'll scan patient's right hand side first. In this case, the software is looking for a little bit of assistance to line the upper arch, and that's okay. We just select a point on that tooth, select a point on that tooth. Everything's aligned. Accept that alignment, and then we'll go for bite number 2, which would be the bite on the left hand side. And there we go. Nice reassuring chime that everything's lined up. And from that point, of course, we can check to make sure we've got a nice level of contact, make sure the arches are in contact and everything's good. We've got a nice level of red around the arch indicating good contact, a few little blue spots there as well if we zoom in, indicating our hard contact. So that gives you good reassurance that the bite was captured and recorded as we wanted it to be. Move on to the send page. And the first step then is that the software will process the data and then send it through to the destination. We've got all our case information here on the left hand side. Where is the scan going to, the patient's name, the delivery date, when it was scanned, and the prescription. And of course, if we wanted to make any changes there, of course we can go back to the original page, make a change, and then hit send. So we click on the send button. Software will post-process the data, which is of course is generating the finalized images, and which are much smaller in size but much finer in terms of detail, and then that will be sent through the 3Shape Communicate platform through to the lab in question. Once the scan has been sent from Trios, it will land in the 3Shape Communicate portal. So I've logged into my Communicate account via the 3Shape web browser. You can log into it as well, of course, through an iPhone app or through an Android app as well. So here we see a list of my most recent cases. If I click on the first one, which is the one that we just sent, the first thing we're presented with is a sequence of static images. So the software has generated some standard view images. If we had attached any photographs to the case, they would be present here. If we had taken any high def images, they would be present here. If we had captured any shade information during the scan, that would also be captured here as well. So we get to see these static images. We can download those. We have a little download icon here. We can download them as static images and bring them into our practice management software, for example, or include them in a patient report if necessary. We also have the option to view the case in 3D. So we can see the upper and lower arch. We're actually looking at both upper arches, the emergence profile scan and the scan flag scan. So we have little sliders here. We can turn off the individual scans. So we're just leaving the emergence profile scan visible, or we can turn on the scan flag scan, turn off the emergence profile scan, and we're just looking at the scan flag scan on its own. We can bring in the lower arch as well. We can turn off the color, and sometimes we like to do that because it gives us a nice contrast of what's going on, a nice view of the contrast. We can zoom in and zoom out and so on as well. We also have an option here to communicate with the lab by typing in some messages. We can attach some files as well. We could attach some photographs from an SLR camera if we wanted to, attach images via our iPhone as well if we want to, if that's the protocol that we choose to do so. One thing I did miss out when I was scanning the case and I set up my preparation, I didn't notify the lab which scan body system I was using. And that's a key thing. It's really important that we do that, particularly in the initial stages. Now, as we mentioned, who is the first person you're going to speak to? Who are the first people you'll speak to when you're talking about implant scanning for intraoral scans? Your lab. So most likely the lab is going to know which scan body system you're using because they told you to use that. But here's a good option. I failed to do it in the notes in the case setup, but we could just type a little note in there and send comment. And as I click on send comment, then that goes into the conversation string, and that information then will be visible by the lab as well. If they had any questions for us, that can come through as well. And we can set up a notification feature within the app on your phone. So anytime a notification is passed one way or the other, anytime a message is passed one way or the other, you will get a notification so that you're not missing out on any important details. So this is a good point now to hand over to Simon, and he can log into the lab software and show us what happens with this particular case from his perspective.
Thanks for the lead in there, Mark. Let's look at what happens to your order after clicking send from the Trios system. Dental Manager is the main landing page when the labs open up the dental system. This is what we can see on the screen here. So what is Dental System? The software is made up of 5 programs all combined. So we have the Dental Manager. This manages patient data, communication, import and export of restorations, models and designs. We have the Control Panel, allows the labs to import material files from partners and customize the dental system to suit the lab's needs. 3Shape Communicate Inbox, all the Trios scans that land here will allow the lab to preview Trios scans and then accept or reject the order. Dental Designer, so this is where they can design restorations such as crowns, bridges, implant abutments, dentures, RPDs, chromes, splints and special trays. Model Builder is the last one. the advancement of iOS scanning, labs need a way of producing models for cases. The model builder allows the lab to create as many types of 3D model. Let's look at Mark's case. So it will land in the 3Shape Communicate inbox. So we come onto here, and there we have our case. We can preview the case, so just by double clicking in this window down here, it will then load up our case. So we've got our upper scan with our soft tissue. We've also got our antagonist, and also we have our secondary scan with our scan body in as well. So we've got a second scan to do our alignment of our scan body. Okay, so we're happy with that. So we're going to now accept the order. Okay, we can also change the delivery date if we want to, but I'm happy with that and go accept. So the case now arrives into the order setup screen, and we can see here we've got our crown that's been placed. We've also got some clinical pictures that have come through, and then it's picked up the patient's name on there as well. And we can also see where it's come from. So it's come from Mark. On this side up here, we've got our order setup. And then we've also got our crown and restoration here. With it being a digital impression, it automatically selects that you need to print a model. And we're going to set up now a screw retain crown. And in this case, we're going to use the hybrid engaging abutment from ELOS, and then select its replace. And we know that it's coming from a replace regular platform. We can also select the material type as well. So go into the zirconia, and then we can select our shade of zirconia. So in this case, I'm going to select A3, and then I'm going to then change our model design, and I'm going to use the ELOS design models for this. So they work complement with the PMAs as well. Okay, so once I've got my order set up, I then select OK. From there, we can now go into designing our restoration. So just right click on here and then go into design, or I could click next. So we then first have to prepare the model. So when I'm doing that, what I've done sometimes do is I'll just check for any holes or any discrepancies in the data. So you can see here it will highlight anything that needs to be tidied up. So I can then click on that and click Refine. Again, I can do the same with the lower. And then I can then set my occlusal setup. This just helps when it's placing the library tooth in position. So just by selecting different points on there, I can then select where my occlusion is and then go on to next. We can also tidy up some of the data. This helps when you're producing the digital model later on. So just by selecting the points, you can then go around the model. Once we've come to the end of that, we just select and fill in. We click on next and do the same on the lower. Once we've done the same on the lower, let's close that. Okay, once we're finished with this, we can go on to next. The next stage in prepare is we can actually edit any of the data, but in this case, I'm just going to leave it as it is and carry on to the next stage. So what we have here now is we're going to do our segmentation, and this is where we're going to merge our scan flag with our CAD model data of the scan flag. What we've got in this situation here is we've got the actual scan flag model highlighted, but if I take this one off, we can also see That's the original scan. So we've effectively got two scans, one on top of the other. But we're just going to work with the scan flag scan. You can check down here to make sure that we've got the correct order. So it's definitely an ELOS replace on a hybrid engaging, and it's using the PMA. And key to this is just make sure that the correct scan body has been selected as well. You can see if I move between them, they will update. So we know it's coming from an IO scan. We can also do a 1-point alignment. So if I just selected 1 point on the scan body and 1 point on the scan, it will do a very good match on that. Again, if I wanted to, I could do a 3-point alignment. So by selecting 3 points on both parts, so 1, 2, 3, and the same again on this one. It's now matched that data. We can also check with that, so we can do a 2D cross-sectional check. So just by selecting on here, and then I draw a line through, we can see how well that's matched the scan data. Okay, from there we can then go on to next. And just remove this out of the way. And it's now placed in our hybrid abutment, and we can also see our PMA analog as well inside of that. Okay, and next thing we can look at is our insertion direction. So we're just going to leave that as is and continue on to next. Okay, so what it's done now is placed a library tooth in the position. And you can see on our right hand side, we've got quite a lot of sliders of visualizations of what we can see. So currently we can see our model. We can also place on our antagonist if we need to. We can also have a look at, if I take the model away, we can also see our PMA under there and our helper crown. So I'll just take that out of the way. We can see our actual hybrid base. And then we can see our PMA as well. So we've got lots of visualization tools that we can actually use on there. And we've also got a scan flag and our hybrid base. I'm just going to place our helper crown back on and our restoration as well. Okay, so what we can do now is we've got lots of sculpting tools that we can use. I'm just going to use the helper crown to place my restoration. So I've got lots of handles where I can manipulate that restoration where I want it to be. Again, if I want to put on my antagonist, I can bring that on at the same time. Okay, so I've got my helper crown placed in there. And then I'm just going to then select next on that. And then we're going to work on the abutment bottom. So we can see here, it's placed the post and core abutment bottom on there. And I've got several little tools I can use here. So I'm actually going to use what's called snap to gingiva. And once I click that, you'll see that it's tried to snap the best it can to the gingiva. And then I'm able then to modify where I want to place that. So again, I'm just going to bring that down a little bit on there. I'll bring that one up there. And again on here, on to here. Okay, so once I've done that, I click on next. And now it merges the two parts together. From there, we can start looking at some of our tools that we've got available to us. Again, we were able then to actually move and change our crown restoration. Again, I just want to change some designs on that. Okay, so big bodily movements first to get the design where I want it to be. And then I can then use some of the sculpting tools from there. So I might want to just add on some more material onto the neck of that. You can see here I can add on more material. Again, I might just want to add on through the base to help me. And then what I can do then is just like a wax knife, is be able to smooth out any of the design restorations to get the contour that I'm looking for. Again, I can do the same on this side. And then smooth that out. Okay. I can just see my contact there, so I'm just going to make that contact a bit wider, going through the restoration, and then go to there. What I can do also is, you can see here my contact is actually going through the restoration on each side. What we can do is go to our Smart Tools, and then we can adjust for that. So I'm going to adjust the actual contacts of that, and we can see now that has adjusted those contacts. Other tools that we've got on here is we can also shape on the morphology. So I can actually shape inside of any of the handles or any of the cusps. Also, I might want to just smooth out on here. The cusp of Carabella on that. Okay, so I'll take that away. Also, we have our articulator in here. So what we can do is I can click onto that, and then it will give me a schematic of our articulator. We'll just place the lower on as well. The articulator, we can move that. We can just move that to get where we want it to be. And then we can also, if needed, we could open the bite if we wanted to. So if I actually change that so to 2 millimeters, you can see that the schematics of the articulator will update. Again, leave it at 0. If I want to play those motions, I can click onto that, and then if I press play on here, you can see now it's going to do some fixed average value movements on there, and you can see there's some coloration on the teeth where they have been placed. I can also adapt that design if I wish, so I can click that. You can see there that there's no movements or no tooth that's actually connected to that. Once I finish with that, I can click close. Okay, and then once I've finished with my design, I'm just going to click next. Go to a finalize stage, so and just make sure I'm happy with what I've got. And I can also go into assembly. So from here, I can see my screw channel. If I wanted to angle correct that, I can do so by selecting the angle screw hole, by clicking on that, and then I can then adapt and change where I want that screw channel to be. So I can do that. And if I want to just see a preview of that beforehand, I just click on to preview, and then that will update where that screw channel will be. Okay, we can go to next. And that's the crown completed. We can now go into the model builder. So now we're in the model builder. We have the same tools as we had before, so we're going to prepare the model. So we're not going to need to do anything here because we did that in the designer. In the 2021 release, we can also adjust for the occlusion. So any premature contacts can actually be adjusted here. So that's where the models are going through each other. I'm going to leave that and proceed on to the model designer. So inside the model designer, we can see how we have our model analog, we have our crown, and our upper and lower. So we have several tools available to us. We can make the model as original, so that will keep the soft tissue profile that was scanned in and produce a model. We have merge all the designs with the model. This is more likely used for diagnostic wax-ups, where you want to combine what you've designed to the model to do with maybe a pull down or something like that. Also, we have our cut gingiva with all designs. And this is the one where it will actually copy the emergence profile that I designed before and relay that along. That makes the lab's job a lot easier when they are actually finalizing the restoration. So I'm going to click on next. Okay, and then if I wanted to, I could section the model so I can add in neighboring teeth, but I'm going to leave it as a solid model. Okay, and we've got our design and restoration. Just going to go next again. And now it's produced our model. So some things we can do here, we can rename it. So you can see here what I can do is I can call it ESM Digital. And then I can then decide where I want to place that name. So let's just place it onto there. I can also add in articulators as well. So if I wanted to add a simple articulator in there, we can see we have that, and then we can actually manipulate that around as we want it to look. There are various other ones available too. So I'm happy with that. Then I can go on to next. Okay, so what I've got now is our finalized model created, and we can see here we've got the outline for the PMA and our crown on there, so we can take that away if we wanted to, just to see what our model looks like. If we wanted to add in some soft tissue, we can do that here. So if I click on to soft tissue, I can then change and manipulate where I want that soft tissue to be. Once I'm happy with the soft tissue profile, I can just go on to next, and then that will cut that away. And then we have our finalized model. So I just go on to next. So we now have our finalized model ready to be printed. So we're back to our dental manager, and what we can do now is look at our CAM output. So this is our machining data. So we can explore the CAM, and then we can see various different types of STLs inside of here. So we have our STL of our design. We also have our model, so our antagonist model. We also have our upper jaw. And you can see here where we've got the soft tissue that's been removed, and lastly our soft tissue as well. So we can also send the designs back up through the 3Shape Communicate portal. So I'm just going to send my updates to Mark. So that's an overview of the dental system. So we looked at accepting the order through 3Shape Communicate, setting up the order, then we went into our design, and then finally our model builder, exporting out those scans to be either 3D printed or milled, and then also sharing that data back with Mark. So I'm going to hand back to Mark now.
So the next thing we want to do is look at some additional functionalities. And again, using Trios as an example, we want to look at some of the kind of the key features within Trios, and let's look at how that information is utilized on the lab side. So we're going to look at patient-specific motion, which is where we can capture a dynamic scan of the patient's jaw and use that as part of our design process. We're going to look at some of the shade measuring features as well, how the shade that's captured by the clinician is transferred through to the lab, but also the fact then that the lab has some additional functionality there that they can utilize as well when working on a case. We're going to demonstrate briefly as well the HD photo option. We always encourage our customers to utilize this feature within the Trios software as much as possible. Just get those little high definition snapshots. And again, we get to see how that's implemented in the lab software. And then finally, there's a pre-prep workflow that we encourage a lot of people to use as well, as much as possible, really, within Trios software. And again, Simon's going to demonstrate how that information is utilized within the lab software. So over to you, Simon.
So let's take a look at the high definition pictures that were taken in the Trios and see how they relate across into the dental system. So I'm currently at the segmentation stage. So what I'm doing is I'm separating the prep from the actual rest of the scan. So then we can then design a restoration on top of that. And if I come across to here, I have a picture of a camera, and then I can see the high definition pictures that were taken from the Trios. This could aid when we're trying to plot the segmentation line through the restoration. Okay, and then we can just proceed on. Going into our anatomy design, we can see here we've got our library tooth on there, and what's happened here is we've scanned the job as it is with a prep, but prior to that we did a pre-preparation scan. So I'm just going to scroll this on and I'll take the library tooth away. We can see there that's our pre-preparation scan, so it could be the scan of the existing tooth prior to prepping it, so we can overlay the two parts together. And now what we can do is we can mirror that scan across. So what we can do is come to here, and then we're going to say morph to additional scan. And then I'm just going to select the tooth that I want to morph. You can see it highlights in blue. And now you can see that it's matched that scan. I'm going to take the pre-op away, and it's merged and matched to that pre-op scan. Likewise, we can also mirror teeth across. So if we want to mirror this tooth across, we could do also. So let's look at the patient-specific motion inside of dental system. So we've got the scan from the Trios, and we've just placed a diagnostic tooth in place, and then we're going to relay those motions. So going to here, and then selecting patient-specific motion, and then I'm going to press the play button, and then that will play those motions. It will also show a graphical coloration of where the contacts are. So what I can do now is take away the antagonist, and we can actually see where those functions have actually been relayed. We can also adapt that design too. So I'm going to say adapt the design, and then I'm going to reapply those motions again. What we can do now is we can do the same with the antagonist. And now it's adapted the design to the patient-specific motions. We can also look at shade measurement as well. So just by clicking on the shade tab, these are the shades that were relayed from the Trios system, and then they are placed onto the tooth. We can also look at other shading on there as well.
Great stuff. Thanks a million for that, Simon. That was really interesting. And now let's look at some do's and don'ts from the labs. So we put a little question out on one of the 3Shape forums on Facebook there a little while ago, and it was really interesting to get some of the feedback. So the main question we had to dentists was, we're going to run to dental labs was, we're going to run this webinar. Have you got anything you want us to tell dentists in terms of what kind of problems you come up with on a routine basis? And we see something here, some do's and some don'ts, and we'll synopsize those now in a moment. And we got some very colorful language as well there from one of our friends. So taking out all the key points there from those various comments, make sure that the margin is free of saliva. One big thing and the very common thread across all lab technicians is that any scanner is not a magic wand. The scanner is just a different type of eye. It just needs to see a nice clear field. It needs to see a nice clear margin. So make sure that the margin is free of saliva, of course, of blood as well. if you, the message is, if you can't see the margin, the scanner can't see the margin, and the lab definitely cannot see the margin. So make sure that you've got, you can see the margin on the scan before you send it to the lab. If you can't see it, the lab's not going to see it. And therefore, you're going to be faced with a situation whereby you may need to retake a scan, worst case. Always check your scan in color and in monochrome to enhance the detail. So we do find color is wonderful. We can see margin, we can see bleeding if there is any, we can see the tooth, of course, as well. But sometimes we like to turn off the color and look at the scan in monochrome because we get a much better degree of contrast. Check the bite. Check the bite and make sure that it is correct. It's often, let's say occasional anyway, that bites come through to labs and the bite is off. Again, that's just, it's another unnecessary question. So just make sure at the time of scanning that the bite is correct. Make sure to remove additional tissue. So, okay, in one of the earlier slides, I showed some tissue artifacts sitting on the surface of teeth. Sometimes we see a lot more than just that as well. Use a trim tool. There's tools within the software to do that, to get rid of that nice and easy. Follow the correct workflow for implant cases. So we demonstrated a very specific workflow. You scan the emergence profile, scan the anatomy, and then scan this with the scan flag in place. Sometimes people get that mixed up. Sometimes they put the scan flag in and do both scans with the scan flag, which kind of makes it a little bit pointless. So just make sure you follow the correct workflow for the implant cases. Inform the lab of the scan body type. So again, I nearly got caught out when I was doing the scanning as well. I didn't mention the scan body type, but as you saw then within Communicate, I made a point of noting that. It's kind of like for you as a clinician, a patient comes with an implant that was put in place 10 years ago. You take an x-ray, you see the implant, you have no idea what it is. And it can be a little bit like that for labs as well. If they don't know, if you don't tell them what scan body they're using, if they don't recognize it, then it becomes a guessing game. And when it comes to lab work, and of course, the design of restorations and all that kind of stuff, we want to minimize and eliminate all guesswork. Next one there, always do a full arch scan. So this was an interesting comment made by one of the technicians, or at least include both canines. So even though you might have a single unit, instead of doing a sectional scan, just go past the midline, go to the other canine. So at least when the scan is being brought into the software and we're running that virtual articulation cycle, that both canine guidance on both sides of the arch is being considered. Don't scan tie bases, use scan bodies, which sounds like an obvious statement, but unfortunately we do see that some labs are receiving scans where the tie base is being inserted into the patient's, into the implant, and a scan happens of that, and it's terrible. It's not the way for it to go. Always scan areas of missing detail. There's my printer going off there. The joys of wireless printing in a household. Always scan areas of missing detail as much as you possibly can. Just make sure you get those areas closed off. The more information you can give the lab, the easier it's going to be for the lab to work with. Verify the shade. If you place the markers on the teeth, identifying the shade, just make sure that you double checked that and verify it, because that's what the lab's going to work with. Use the pre-prep function on anterior cases for indication purposes. So this was an interesting comment made by one of the technicians online, that for anterior cases, there's going to be something there, right? There's going to be provisional crowns, there's going to be a temporary denture, there's going to be something there that you like and that the patient likes as well. Scan that as a pre-prep, so that when the lab then is working on the finalized design, they've got a good idea where you want the incisal edge, where you want the gingival line, the shape of the teeth, and so on. And always, always, always follow the prescribed scan strategy. You buy Trios, you buy iTero, you buy Sirona, you buy whatever scanner you want. They all may have different nuances in terms of how you scan. There's no one scanning strategy that will work for all. So the scanning strategy has been developed to maximize the accuracy of the scan, so always follow that. Here's an example of some per scans that we've recently received, and these are cases we've had to work on with our customers, and these have come in from the lab. These scans came from the lab, so unfortunately they kind of were the defects were missed on the clinic side. So here we have a very significant layering situation, and still a very significant issue, but not so obvious. But what we can definitely see here, we see a crack line appear. So we've effectively got two versions of the same surface, and that's something that gives us great concern. And you can see this cracking line happening here on the lower incisors, and there's like a detachment between the palatal surface of the incisors here and the facial surface as well. That's always the kind of thing for a clinician you should be watching out for that. Since day one, since the very first time you took an impression, the first thing you do is you look inside that impression to see, is it suitable? And from a digital perspective, you still need to keep up that routine. Thankfully, with digital, we can rescan an area if needs be. We can delete out an area if needs be. We've got all these additional tools to help us get a great scan all the time. So the important thing is keep an eye on your scans and make sure you utilize those tools to make sure you get a good scan. So are we there yet? Are we 100% digital? Can we do everything in a digital manner? And I'm not going to put a percentage on it, but we're nearly there. So what we can do digitally, and what we can do very, very well digitally, and we have been doing for many years digitally, is crown and bridge, of course. Implants, as we demonstrated today, whether single units or multiple units, we can do full arch scanning. We've got a number of customers who are doing full arch implant scanning, splints, partial dentures, orthodontics. All of those indications can be carried out in a 100% digital manner. Where we are nearly there, digital articulation. So Simon demonstrated some of the articulation capabilities on the lab side, but can we truly replace a face bow? Right now, the answer is no. However, there are products coming through that will definitely help us do that. And full dentures as well. We're not there 100% yet, but there are certain aspects of the workflow that can be digitized. Can we take an intraoral scan of an upper arch or lower arch and capture the bite for fully edentulous patients? We can do the scans, yes. We can't capture the bite. So we may use those scans to maybe to produce a custom tray, work from that point on, and then we can have various stages of that process will be digital. So that takes us to the end of our webinar. I believe I could see some questions coming through, and Simon, I think you've been keeping an eye as to what's been going on there as well. So you okay to run through those questions?
Yeah, so we've had a few questions. I think the printer's printed them off for you. What we can do here is we've got the first question: is it possible to use scan flags from one manufacturer and mix it with components from another manufacturer? So i.e. Elos and Medentica. So I'll answer that one. This is generally not recommended unless the both companies have collaborated together and developed their own validated workflow. It's not, if this doesn't take place, then you're exposing yourself to problems as who's taking responsibility. So it ends up being a fight between them, or they'll just say, we're not getting involved in it. So ideally try and stick with one provider and not try and mix and match those. The second question is, if Trios is used for patient-specific motion, can this information be used by other CAD softwares? I think other CAD softwares, also dental lab CAD softwares. No, the software are not able to interpret the movements. This is captured in a proprietary format. Because there is no generic or open format suitable for the recording of this information. So it's just developed for working with the Trios and then transferring that across to the dental system, those motions, and then they're able to be replicated like a virtual articulator like we saw in the video. Okay, the third question we've got: are there any virtual articulation solutions available? Mark, do you want to
Sure.
Question into that one.
Articulation. So face bows. Okay, virtual face bows. There are actually, that question must have come in before that last slide. There are some solutions. We got Mod Jaw is something that's what we've come across and starting to kind of make some gain some ground within the market. I was at IDS, saw Zebras, which is kind of a unit that's mounted on the patient's head, and a little part of it then goes into the mouth, and the motion can be tracked in that manner. Saw a really interesting solution as well by SAM, the Facebow and Articulator people, and it was a scannable Facebow. So it's a regular Facebow, except there was an element of it that had multiple 3D patterns built into it, and that made it very, very scannable. So I think the idea was there you could take your Facebow and then scan the Facebow with your Trios solution or whichever intraoral scanner you were using, and then that could then be digitally translated. I think the key thing about all of this, as wonderful as it is, you could invest heavily, get a beautiful solution that's in the clinic and can capture the jaw motion, can capture the exact and precise position of the maxilla relative to the condyle. But unless there's an integration between it and the lab CAD solution, its value is quite limited. So it's certainly something. I know 3Shape are working on various integrations there, and I'm sure ExoCAD and all the other guys are doing so as well. So it's definitely something. If it's something you're interested in doing, speak with the manufacturer of the equipment for sure, but fully understand the integrations and get your lab involved as well. Again, we see it, and kind of defending the labs here, we often see that information scans or whatever might come at the lab, and maybe there's no integration in place, and the dentist is left with this product that actually maybe isn't as useful as perhaps it was sold as being. So definitely get everybody involved, get your lab guys involved, try and understand the product and integrations fully.
Okay. And the next question: if a margin line is defined by the clinician using Trios, is this carried through to the lab software? If it's going from the Trios system to dental system, yes, it is. That information is actually carried across. So when they're actually segmenting the model, they'll go through that stage, and then as soon as they get into the plot in the margin line, that will then be shown on the scan, and then the lab can continue on working from that.
Okay, great.
So, and the last question that I can see here: if two separate files are sent to the lab, one pre-op and one of the prep, how are these used by the software, or must the workflow demonstrated be used every time? So the lab can create a new order and import both scans, or use various tools to align the scans and continue this way. Both scans are taken in the correct manner and are accurately recorded. This works well, that any discrepancies due to poor scanning strategy, etc., might lead to difficulties in aligning the scan. So we can take in various different scans. If they're not scanned at the same time, the lab has got the ability to align those together and then match them, and then carry on with the workflow. But also they have another ability where they can export different scans out as well in the dental system. So they can actually overlay scans together and then export one of those out as an STL. Sometimes we get questions where they want, where the lab wants the upper and lower as one STL. So maybe they need some work with NHS contracts. They might actually ask for a specific, it has to be upper and lower. The dental system does actually allow that feature inside of there. But going back to the question, definitely yes, it doesn't have to be in the same sitting. They can be separate scans, and the lab can then merge them together.
Okay, great. I suppose the consideration there is that there may be some risk if there's discrepancies. It might make things a little bit more difficult. So I suppose bottom line, if you can utilize the pre-op workflow that we often talk about and that you demonstrated previously, Simon, that would make life a little bit more easier all around, maybe a bit more predictable as well. Great stuff. Okay, is that everything now?
Yeah, I think that's all the questions that have come in tonight.
If more questions come through, we'll get to email them out. We can email the responses out. Excellent stuff. Well, listen, I've enjoyed myself tonight. I hope you have as well, Simon, and everybody here. I hope you've all enjoyed and picked up a few little nuggets of information that can hopefully help you. understand what's going on the lab background. So thanks a million for your attention. Any questions, feel free to email either myself or Simon, and you can reach us there on our UK number and our Irish number as well. Okay, thanks a million, everybody.
That's great. Thank you.
For tonight. Take care. Bye-bye.